and I'll get started. So it is resumed, and it's on the cloud, I presume, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because I won't log off that way, because if there is no way I'm going to be able to finish all the slides that I have, because I found some interesting material that people, if they care to, if they have interest, they can look at it at their own. And I see that people are looking at, some of the YouTube links. So this is, we covered the Aristotelian senses earlier, but some of the lesser known senses and some of the more bizarre things that as Homo sapiens we don't have access to are such as electricity and echolocation. We'll talk at more length about it because the focus of the talk was animal senses. The lesser known senses that we talked about are, now this is, I digress because I found something very interesting, just a paper that was pushed to my content about colors, as to how initially we always thought that this was chlorophyll, red and blue absorbed, the pigment is absorbed, and that explains the pink flamingos. But a very recent paper that was just released, this is a groundbreaking thing about, there is inside the insects, there is like a multi-layer, tiny layer in their cuticle, and those are like a tiny crystal-like cells, they're arranged in hexagonal materials, so to speak. So that's what, and they were able to, even based on the feather analysis, even able to determine what type of coloration early dinosaurs would have. So some of the research which is done for something called cross modality is just phenomenal type of thing. So that, and this was another paper that unfortunately the molecular biologists are not signed in yet, but this was an interesting to show, to just give a nod to genetics as to how the colors of parrots are simply due to change in one gene and one enzyme. The name is academic unless you're a molecular biologist, but that simple gene, it changed the whole thing about this amazing diversity of colors that took place. Okay, so this was about as recent a paper that I could find. So this is, how and these are totally new technologies to analyze, and the color that is called, this is not the standard opsins that we talked about, but a simple different type of chemical which appropriately named cetacofulvin. Psittacosis is, the medical people would know, that's a disease that you can catch from your parrots. Okay, now the lesser known senses that we need to briefly address, I'll call proprioception. Okay, which is knowing the position of of your limbs. You don't have to know which way your hand is, but you just automatically know. And the at least the medical students and the physicians will know. And this is the simplest way to explain would be, this is a classic drunk driver test. You're standing with your feet together, eyes closed, and see if you can touch the tip of your nose. So this is a sensory sensation in your muscles, tendon, limb position. Okay, so that's called proprioception. And usually people don't bother with it because as long as it's working, no, for us, it is working like an underground. It's just like the internet. Some of the stuff that is working beyond what you and I do when we click on the browser. So, and that is, and that has to do, and again, this can be checked with your vestibular balance, standing on one leg. You can do that, easily, but try doing that with your eyes closed. And that becomes a challenge. And the same way, the people, how the ballet dancers can go around, several times without falling over, and they have learned how the techniques of how to do that, focusing on one particular point to avoid getting dizzy. And similarly, skaters have a way of doing differently because they can't keep looking at one spot. They're moving at a blitzkrieg speed. So they just shake their head free to reset their receptors in their vestibular canal. So there are varieties of sensations. So that's just something that is, in this little cartoon diagram that I copied from Wikipedia. is, where these receptors are situated and sends messages, at below your conscious level for you to know. And the other sensation that is a lesser known, but it's there very much, and is now a hot field of research, is called interoception. That is your sensation from your visceral organs, and that's just one way to explain this. Most of us have heard the word vagus nerve. Vagus means wandering nerve, and that is the way your brain and your gut and your heart and your lungs are connected. Okay, and that explains your palpitations that you get, or feeling sick in the pit of your stomach that takes place. And since 2000, this has been a hot field of research. The cardiovascular, respiratory, gastrointestinal, immune complexes, and all of this information goes into an area of the brain called your insula of your brain. And that's like they explained the gut instinct. And this is apparent in people who are high stake traders or hostage negotiators, and they're able to control their emotions and still think rationally and work. And this again plays a huge role in things such as post-traumatic stress syndrome. And again, with the strong emphasis on meditation and mind-body connection, this is a big role. And one of the few public libraries that gets Science Magazine is the New Tampa Library. And Science Magazine has Young Investigators Award. And just recently, a paper that was published by a young scientist at Yale, and this is his slide, and this is with a variety of bioinformatics, which is the use of computer in analyzing genetics and tissues layers imaging with, again, very sophisticated technology. He created a model for what is called interoception. So this is a very hotly researched area, but and again, this can be a problem in autism. Okay, and
may I ask a question?
Please go ahead, George.
When you feel fear, is that an interoception sense?
Okay, no, it's maybe more of a chemical reaction type of thing, like flight and fright survival, that just goes back to the classical receptors, you're either a runaway or mate or eat, sensation. I think that's just the much more primitive type thing. I don't think I would put that in necessarily, because the explanation was flight and fright response and the fear, the survival instinct, that is a lot more primitive, and I don't think we would necessarily, at maybe more chemical based rather than just this nerve sense, type of thing, and obviously the images still, based on your thing that would go along in your insula and other stuff, but it's just a more of the classical reflex that from neurology, response that would kick in. So they're more simple, and because the way I would think would be, there's a more simpler classical explanation. So this may be a more intricate or mechanism that evolved later, but I think that I would just think that would be the classical primitive response that is there. That's my understanding, but I will read up more into it, type of thing. Okay. Okay, and one thing that we did not talk about is synesthesia. This is when when I did the class on human senses, this was absolutely a fun subject to understand, how the joint synthesis and anesthesia, the two words are combined, how the perception, is to like how, the different colors, are easy to spot, and the variety of senses people have. And the classical example would be, like autistic people who can see colors in numbers, like blue is associated with number 2 type of thing. So when your sensory connectivity in the brain is talking more than it should, perhaps, and some of these people can be very savant type person, and and obviously, and it can also be autistic, and one functioning savant and was a British guy who was actually a functioning autistic person, and on a on a Wednesday, I see in blue. So this is how, and number wise, and he had phenomenal ability mentally. He was able to memorize the uh, fraction of pi, 3.15, up to 1 million digits in a span of 2 months, and recited in front of a committee at Oxford. So he had some prodigious mental abilities. But at the same time, as a child, he had epilepsy and and autistic behavior. And he came over and did so I had read several of his books back in the 90s. Now, what led me to this thing as to why did I even mention this when we're talking about animals? Because I decided to look it up. Some of the chimps, people have done research that our cousins sort of have some sort of evidence for it, that based on, showing, visual and auditory stimuli that did find some evidence for synesthesia. So that's a very fun uh, modality to investigate, but I won't go too much about it. The second, the word that is come into vogue is called cross-modal, okay, or like using multiple senses, and obviously the standard example that one can give in humans is potato chips taste better when they're crunchy, okay. The same way food that looks palatable, I mean, like the appearance, like how it is placed on a white plate, it has a different effect on you. And the same way, if you're getting coffee, if the coffee machine is still brewing coffee, you think it's not that good, and so this is, and a tongue in cheek, one of the researchers said, if you want a man to follow you, make creme brulee, the appearance is good, the smell is good, and the taste is good. So multiple modalities are, and again, the reason for talking about this adoption is even bottlenose dolphins, who are masters of echolocation and at the same time smell. So they use the cross modality sensation. So it is apparent even in other animals. And at the same time, the classic example would be, like the senses work in conjunction. The dog has great smell, but has great hearing. And the same way, so the senses work in conjunction and work in cooperation. So, and for example, like platypus that we'll talk about a little later, as receptors in its beak, okay, but at the same time can have electroreceptors as well. So there is an overlap that takes place. Now we'll talk about the super senses, which we don't have. And the first primary example would be bats, and clicks form in the nose go out and go out via mouth. I'm sorry for the typo, or nose. Okay, and this is, it's like we talk about the evolution. We would, because we think obviously we are the top dog on brain, but the brain processing that goes around would be faster than the computer chip. I mean, it's just a phenomenal, and I'll give you some statistics for it. And this is not a new thing. This was researched by Italian anatomists as far back as 1790. Okay, and they had proposed a guy whose name was classic Italian named Spallanzani, had said the bats can see with their ears. And then later on, further research in the early 20th century confirmed some of these. Okay, and and as bats close in on prey, because they have to eat almost 10 times their weight in insects to keep it, because their metabolism is high. They're working at, at extreme speed. And so they know that it's a marvel of evolution that one can say that type thing. And their heart rate increases, and they're able to generate more than 160 clicks per second. Okay. And at the same time, the echolocation is different than, say, sight, because sight is passive. You're reflecting, the photons are entering your eye and changing the morphology, reception. Same way, touch is already there, because you don't have to create touch. Okay. The same way, hearing, you're just passively picking up auditory waves. But echolocation, the creature has to generate clicks and receive. So you're transmitting and receiving both. So the pace is, phenomenally fast, So, And at the same time, the bat is flying, in a company of thousands of other bats. And at the same time, the object that they are hunting, primarily insects or moth, they're not exactly standing quietly to be captured and eaten. They have evolved, they're moving in 3 dimensions, and they've evolved their strategies for avoiding being a prey. Okay. And the same way, dolphins have they have the similar thing, and they have the thick lips called the melon, okay, the fatty organ, where that the phonic lips, so that's where they're receiving, transmitting and receiving sounds. Okay, so in evolutionary, it's just mind-boggling when you see the numbers. Okay, and the sound that they generate, because it has to be fairly loud, because the caves that they're living in are noisy with other bad things. So it generates at like 140 decibels, as far, as loud as a jet, and at the same time, and so that's beyond our hearing range, and and at the same time, that they have to be able to receive the signal that comes back. And they have to make sure they don't themselves hear it, and otherwise they'll go deaf. I mean, so they're able to contract their middle ear muscles so they don't, when they transmit, they don't exactly receive, and then they're ready to receive very quickly. Okay. And their vocal muscles contract 200 times per second, and the processing time is that they can detect a 1 millimeter difference. So it's just a mind-boggling type of thing. And they're like the radio receivers. They transmit their stimuli in both AM and FM type of thing, continuous frequency or modulating frequency. So they have 2 channels, so different species of bats have. Okay, and this is again, I've mentioned this several times about what it is like to be a bat, So, but there is no way we can conceive what it is like to be a bat, because there is no way we don't have that processing power, auditory power. And with very sophisticated recording system only they can, okay. But there was a big philosophical, axiom that was raised, okay. But there is, these are some interesting facts about bats that, that this has, that you can just glance at it yourself, it's in a big enough thing. So they can vary, in huge sense. They can sleep upside down. Okay. And there were, I did not know that they were worshipped by, I don't know which civilization. Okay, but there was, so there are some, and this is like the fear of bats, type of thing. And obviously that goes down with Dracula and the blood-sucking, tales that were prevalent in. Okay, for sake of time, I'm not going to show this, because otherwise I'll jinx my computer, basically, because the video will open on the other monitor. Okay, now the other interesting thing about well, moving on to sea turtles, and this is the magnetic sense, because as we all know, Earth has a magnetic field that is at not exactly north-south, it is tilted. But the marvel of this are the loggerhead turtles, and along with some sperm whales, and even the tiniest, they form, when they breed, they form thousands of hatchlings, and they're able to travel to across the oceans. And when and obviously only one in maybe 5,000 would survive, the hazardous journey across the ocean. But they finally, when they become mature, they manage to turn exactly in the same coast of Florida or wherever their location would be, almost down to the, few hundred yards, so to speak. So and they're able to now see the incline of the magnetic field as well as the direction. So based on those, so you can just say they are actually doing geometric calculations type of thing. So, okay, so north, south, and east, west, okay. And so that is, it's an amazing ability to sense the magnetic field, okay. And their cells have, have evolved magnetite in their brain, which is able to do this, okay. So special type of cells that have this ability that has evolved. And similarly, the humpback whales, travel all the way from Antarctica to Fiji, North Alaska to Hawaii. Okay, and again, this And that may be an explanation when they beach themselves, because due to a solar cycle, when the magnetic field changes, their obviously their direction compass gets mixed up, and that may be a possible explanation. People looked at the data of the solar storms and see what, and they correlated that. So there was like almost an investigating journalism. Okay, any comments? Okay. Now, so this is, so that was magnetic. And obviously, magnetism and electricity are intricately connected. So this is, we talked about. Now, when we talked about earlier the touch, that you may recall that fish have something called lateral lines. That is their touch things on all along their body. So now then now the touch can be mixed up, because and it has to be in proximity, and that relies on vibration, which does not have a long range. And the fish, generally the big fish at least, are solitary, so they're not in physical contact. So relying on vibrations that comes through water, that is kind of a relatively narrow range. So so the same cells on their skin have evolved to form electroreceptors. So this is, helpful for navigation, communication, defense, and prey detection. So this is the electrical sensation, and not just in the nose, but the hair. And there is there is a special organ that was anatomically dissected called ampulla of Lorenzini. And so this is, and basically water is salty. They are in sea, so that makes a good conductor type thing. So that was, so the electrical fields are generated. So it is the right medium for, for electrical current. And this has been known from times immemorial. Even the Egyptians and the Greeks knew about it. Okay, and the word that is called torpedo fish, it was called in Greek, was called narke, Narke, and that had a stunning effect on people who inadvertently touched them. That may explain the origin of the word narcotics. Okay, and this again inspired the early research on battery. Okay, when the electricity experiments were done after Benjamin Franklin and others who followed on his tails, you know, and realized that, that electrical field research was inspired, earlier by the electric fish, and later on, obviously, the physical chemistry got involved into it, and then a later research was carried out by varieties of other Russian geologists. In okay, and so that's so electricity is used in two ways: active, passive, and attack mode. Okay, and these are some of the more examples of electricity. Okay, you can see, I mean, they're pacing up whopping voltage, 800 volts. I mean, that's not exactly, fun and games, so that can be real dangerous. And, electroreceptors and the stimuli can be created. And it's a quick response because electricity travels at a lot faster rates. And they have as many as 14,000 receptors on their skin. Okay, and the enterprising German polymath researcher named von Humboldt, just to prove this, he actually drowned horses, along with in a pond or lake which was filled with electric fish in South America, and sure enough, the horse was died in electrical damage. Okay, so that was proven that it wasn't a myth, type thing. So, okay, and so I have a lot more information on electrical field, but you just get the general idea of what it's all about. Okay, and now all animals have a low amount of each and every cell has electrical potential. So obviously, if you have sensitive enough instruments, you can detect the cell inside. If you have like a micropipettes and insert it, you can record it. So, and those were the classical experiments were done in the early days of neuroscience, where people inserted pipettes and recorded the voltage. Okay, so, and now on the other side, a platypus, now that's primarily a land living a marsupial or a marsupial, or I'm sorry, I should know that, marsupial or mammal. So it's on the or text of this. And in the beak, as I talked about, has electrical receptors as well as touch receptors. So it digs with this big beak. And primarily it's in the southern hemisphere, i.e. Australia. And as I mentioned earlier, when the specimen was sent to the French zoologist, they just thought this was a hoax. Somebody was pulling a fast one on them because the animal looked so weird with the duck bill and the way the body shape of an otter and webbed feet and but that they can also swim, okay, and so the salt water is a better conductor obviously, but that still the remains as, and the number of receptors are relatively small compared to the touch receptors, but it can generate an electrical field and use it, uh, you know, and because otherwise they can't just go digging uh, at random, because otherwise the yield would be very poor. Okay, the same thing occurs for the spiny anteater, because it's a weird looking animal, egg-laying land mammal, but has receptors. And this is an exception. This is the first time this is the terrestrial animals have been shown. Okay, and they were immersing the snout in tap water. The Australian researchers were able to document the voltage. Okay, so this is so this was again, and some of the more, this is about as bizarre a creature as you would find, that has just as a point of interest, it has a four-headed penis. Okay, so during the sex, two of the heads are shut down while the other two grow bigger to fit the female receptacle. Okay, so it's this sex has taken varieties of evolutionary paths, and I have a series of slides on animal and sex, but time-wise, I'm not going to be able to show it. I think I may, if you're interested, just let me know. I can send them, as a separate package. Okay. And so this is again, it's it forms it has an egg-laying mammal, but has no nipples. Okay. And it's a land-based animal, but has no teeth, but has sticky tongue, so which makes a good, so it's really like really a very odd creature of evolutionary quirk, to put it mildly. Okay, and this is a very complicated slide about how the electrical environment sends signals, and the electrical organ has varieties of pacemakers, and there is also some other types of how the impulse goes around in the brain, but this is probably a lot more than, this is, it gets into some real neuroscience. So I think we will not dwell too much into it, type thing. So, but I think I got a little carried away when I talked about, so there are varieties of electroreceptors and they all get processed in the brain via the electrical organ. So if you remember that, that's good enough for most regular citizens, Okay, all right. And then again, electricity is everywhere type of thing, that, because obviously in the atmosphere, even the bees, is a thunderstorm generate constant electricity. So the upper atmosphere is positive and go to the surface is negative. Okay. So that, so that way there is a very subtle current that is there, and the flowers have water, and that again they have a negative charge, and the bees have a positive charge, so they can detect the electrical charge, and that is one of the reasons why they can exactly zone in onto the area which is of interest to the flower, for the flower's interest, and for the bee to get to catch the nectar. So both this is a symbiotic relationship that has evolved. Okay, so this is again, electricity is not just a hit and miss that they just don't land on it, but there is a definite, localization that takes place. So, and Yeah, okay, and similarly, spiders are also using electrical field with a phenomenon called ballooning. They extrude a strand of silk that picks up the negative charge that sends them flying. Okay, then so that's why this is almost mind-boggling and hard to believe. And like a Ripley's Believe It or Not, 2.5 miles away and 1,000 miles out to the sea, a lowly spider can be there. And so electricity has. Okay, and this I may digress, but bees, we talked about how the electricity is, but this is the first time something called a group called ethnobiology received a Nobel Prize for Carl von Frisch for the waggle dance of bees, as to how they communicate with other bees as to where the food is located. Okay, and again, the role of electricity, and this is varieties of, and they control the angle, speed, the frequency of the waggle, the intensity. So this was to tell the others in their hive to where is the best way to get to the food, what is the quickest and most efficient way to get there. And so that was a groundbreaking research. That was the waggle dance. Okay. And the buzzing intensity changes. So varieties of way they can communicate with their friends. Okay. And I already showed this earlier, and so this has to do with and because all the senses, it has to do with your identity of self and non-self self. That is one of the reasons why you can't, as long as it's working, you don't feel your stomach or your heart for that matter, or which way your arm is lying, okay, or how your back is rotated upside down or what have you. And these are the varieties of psychological terms that have been promoted, called, the sensation from outside versus inside, reafference and exafference, okay. And that gets messed up if you have a mental illnesses, as we talked about, such as schizophrenia. Okay, and this is how the inside controls between the self and non-self. Okay, and again, this is the magnetic field we talked about. Okay, and we talked about the loggerheads, but at the same time, birds, are equal masters, that they are traveling, where the field is changing, the underground terrain is changing, and they can travel thousands of miles, to get to the warmer climate, from central Germany to north southwest into Spain, or so. And people that initially this was considered a doubtful research, but varieties of enterprising scientists did research by putting birds in hexagonal cages and altering the magnetic field by putting coils and electricity on it, to see which direction they were hopping. So some groundbreaking work was done to show that yes, that they are able to because they can't obviously see that from that altitude. Their vision is not that accurate. They're flying it. There were some thoughts that they were navigating based on stars and moon, but again, the research has been confirmed that is magnetic reception that plays a role. Okay, and similarly, that belugas may communicate by the melon, which we talked about. Okay, and this was a video type of thing, but again, for sake of time, I'm not going to jinx it, basically, because every time I'm trying to do that, it has messed up my screen sharing, so to speak. And it shows that, reveals that make 5 different distinct melon shapes that were dubbed flat lip, lift, press, push, and shake. So there are, this is not just random, but there's a different way of communicating to each other. So almost like the Fleischmann response that we saw in pig, so that is around. Okay, I might be able to show that without. Oh, it is on the same video, so you'll get a brief idea. Okay, so that was short and quick, so my mistake, sorry. Okay, and this is a more dramatic diagram as to see how the varieties of shapes takes place, 5 distinct shape Okay. Okay, and we already talked about, how, the octopus can, cover themselves inside the coconut shell, and this is the blue octopus, and we, unfortunately, I think Dr. Bird, who is, you know, a literature and a person in a library, who is not here, and he had expressed interest in talking about the cognition and sentience, so I've created some slides to that effect. Okay. And obviously octopus have been in the news, like my best friend octopus and Cy Montgomery, a researcher, has done variety of work, and that has been made into movies, and so they're the popular creature, and it's totally different evolution because they are quite old on the evolutionary tree. They've been around for, mollusks, and have been around for 600 million years, before this so-called Cambrian explosion. Okay. And and their brain is, we'll talk more about it in just the next few batch of slides, or perhaps after the break. But this is an example as to how they can use tools to protect themselves, because they don't have, like arthropod, like they don't have a hard shells. So they have to protect themselves from other this thing, like, you know, other fish that are, and the sharks that are out to get them. So they have developed varieties of mechanism hiding, at the same time evolving toxins. Okay, and they know. So okay, and this was, the example of the turtles that we talked about, the natural horning, and that's this fancy word, just means that they're remarkably precise in returning to the location where they bred. Okay, and similarly, all other animals have been known to do that well. I mean, the salmon run is well known, and the elephant seals have the same this thing. And so this is, the Earth's magnetic field, unbeknownst to us, plays a big role. And last but not the least, animals can be quite territorial. And here you can see marking the territory with dung showering hippo, okay, or urine showering, sorry, lions, okay. And so this is, okay. And so this thing would be either keep out or come hither, So this is, so these are some of the videos from the documentary channel videos. Okay. And yeah. And that's it. No, and again, variety of animals have evolved. Periorbital glands in the gazelle have developed urine and chest glands to mark the scent to attract the females. And sometimes, the pheromones, we talked about briefly. Okay. And then this is the mimicry that orb web does, creates a spider web for, catching the prey. Okay. And here you can see the moth creating the same thing too. So varieties of mechanisms have evolved in different animals for survival, defense, and mating. Okay, and this is again the more classical example of natural homing, which we talked about. The European robin, common blackbird, and European robin is different than the American ones, by the way. But so the migration pattern is, as you can see, it's thousands of miles. Okay, and we talked about, the masters of magnet, that occurs, inclination and intensity. We talked about already earlier. And again, the sunspots and magnetic field change has a huge detrimental effect on this. Okay. Now, okay. And some of the mechanisms that were done, this was a controversial field that was proposed as to how this magnetic things may be going about. And this was one of the other explanations that was given, that, some type of electron transfer. And now I presume that unless you're interested in physics, you may not know as to how, well, if you're observing one particle, one of changes the position quickly, it's like that in physics, it's called spooky action at a distance. Okay, and this type of mechanism inside the protein, like electron transfer in proteins, has been proposed as a possible explanation for the magnetic sense. And initially this theory was hard for biologists to explain because, again, quantum physics was hard for physicists to come to terms with, and it was even harder for biology community to accept. But it's slowly, getting the most recent research is said to be, being slowly being accepted, that this type of proteins and the magnetic sensation and the electron transfer business may be, may have some real scientific basis on it. So to look that up, and this is the research from some university called JHU, by the way, wherever that is. Okay, and I'm sorry, that's my slides are. Okay, and this is again, initially I think my talk was going to end at this, so then I panic-wise, so this was 3 days ago. This was on animal synergy was in, okay, and we are supposed to match these clues with each other, okay, and the answers were, like Drango Bird Kalahari, okay, this savannah, okay, that was associated with big bird with good eyesight and equine with good smell. Okay, I'm sorry, this is okay. So this was, so it was a very popular subject, and I think, I think we can match the clues, and if you're interested, you can look at my notes, but I think so. It was, the cross-modal senses and synergy, is has attacked the so-called popular guys. Okay, all right, sentience and intelligence. Okay, and I will stop for a few seconds, and if anybody wants to comment or anything, please jump in. Okay, I think, anyway, I think it's a blessing that we're ending our class because our audience is very quickly thinning out, okay? Okay, and sentience and intelligence. So that is like, being aware of, and go ahead, I'm sorry.
I said that I had no idea about the role that electricity plays
Yes,
in insects. It's just fascinating. Had no idea.
No, I just, it was in the news because, obviously, we don't, like in some of this research is more recent type of thing, because otherwise, just insects are good for pollination. That's all we were taught basically
Yeah, yeah.
in school biology. So, they do pollen and it sticks to their legs and they merrily go to the next one. So, but it is, and this was some of the surprising that as to how people were collecting, chemicals in the Amazon thing by using net, like a collecting butterflies type of net, and collecting, varieties of chemicals that are released by birds, and creating perfumes. So that was mind-boggling as to how.
It is.
Because, they have to come out with a new perfume. You can't sell Chanel number 5 every year, So to create new flower senses, you have to travel to some esoteric areas where there are remote flowers, which you haven't. It can't all be just roses and marigolds, So the research is that's phenomenal type of thing, and so I had much more fun, researching the human senses, So, and I think I'm sure hopefully most of you have received the because I get bored with redoing the other stuff, so I just record on YouTube and move on to our next subject, so to speak,
Yeah.
Okay, and as I may have mentioned, I was going to do a class on bioelectricity, but that'll have to wait, because some of the research that is done it is not all Frankenstein, there is some real science behind it, and our DNA expert John is not here, but he and I have all, and recently just I mean, most of you have heard about Richard Dawkins,
Oh, yeah.
along with the most popular book that came out in the early 80s was called selfish gene. Okay. And now that was when he was 30 something or 40 something, the young. And that was a concept that became very popular and became part of, common expression, just like black holes and Stephen Hawking. Now he has written another book about, it's like finally his last farewell about again, because this has always been controversy as to what is the real me, what is the most important one, as to those who have studied evolution, again, the earlier thing was from the early days of biology, it was cell, okay, and then with Watson and Crick, we went to DNA, and with the billions of dollars we spend on analyzing the human genome, this was the 20th century became the decade of the genome. And, and unfortunately, our hopes have not been, because it was a lot more complicated than just isolating genes for one gene. And so, and now the pendulum is swinging as to looking at the whole. And this again, I will just segue into the discussion on consciousness and other areas, because it goes around into the philosophy of science, into reductionist approach, which has been the mainstay of Western research, including in physics, chemistry, and now in biology as well. And that has to do, and as opposed to the more holistic approach that the Eastern philosophy has taken, as to looking at the whole picture, type of thing. So, and again, we're sort of interconnected, and those of you with strong memory may remember we mentioned about the concept of Gaia that was proposed as the Earth as living, breathing organism, and things are interconnected. So that, boils down as to how, and so a lot of, and I'm still Richard Dawkins, I read his latest book, which has been well reviewed and is available through local library. And he still strongs firmly that we just haven't looked hard enough with our reductionist approach to tease down the genetic basis for all our actions and behavior. So he still digs into the two other people who questioned about one was another popular evolutionary biologist, Stephen Jay Gould, who had written something called How All of a Sudden the Explosion Takes Place, because he did a lot of his research on the Cambrian shell and the Burgess shell as to how, either with availability of more oxygen, the explosion of life took place in the Cambrian shell, and only to go through the extinction. Several extinctions have taken place, and as some of you may have read the book called Sixth Extinctions, okay, and the various ages that we go through. So there was Stephen Jay Gould, who was, I think that evolutionary was just a nice linear thing called, and the word that he popularized was called punctated equilibrium, type of thing. And some of the other scientists who are more physiologists have talked about that DNA is primarily information molecule. And they may have some, credence to their argument, because DNA left alone would degenerate and decompose, that is the crime scene. People are very well aware of it, that they deteriorate by itself. So it needs, some type of layer, which is the lipid layer, which is the cell. And that may be the way to communicate self and non-self, okay, as to what is inside. Because initially from one cell, so your liver cells are working in collaboration. So they don't go around producing insulin, that job is delegated to your pancreas. The same way heart has pacemaker cells, but means your kidneys are not going to start beating, or your bladder is not going to start beating at 60 times per minute. So otherwise you'd have to pee every minute. And so that's, so that's the cells have worked to have specialized and worked in collaboration. So, and the concept is when the cells go rogue, that's when you get cancer. Okay, so that's the concept of saying, like when the cell loses its self-control mechanism and multiplies indiscriminately, okay, that's when and that may be one of the dangers that we will run into. We are running into so-called stem cells because, with endless growth, you're at a risk for getting cancer. So that just gives us an idea type of thing. Now, the self and non-self, that has always been the question. We always thought that we were the pinnacle of intelligence. But as a more zoological research started coming into existence, that other animals have senses, and obviously Darwin was the one who's get the ball rolling. But as other research became available in other fields, starting from extended zoology, the other animals, with the dolphins, elephants, when people, European naturalists discovered Africa, they discovered elephant senses. And when people started looking at the oceans, they discovered the sentience and the intelligence of dolphins and other big apes and chimps. Okay. And this has been the list has gradually expanded. And this was the most recent research that I came across. They said the tiny little fish that are they go inside the mouth of big fish, like whales and shark, and there is symbiosis that takes place, and they're able to pass the sense of self in a mirror. And this was a research from Japan, and the Japanese are big into fish research, and again they do some excellent work. So I have no reason to doubt that their research was on the up and up. So, but this is the only fish that, and so the more you read about evolution, it's really fascinating as to how, and reading biology, a type of thing that just a few years ago, initial, like this traditional biologist named Neil Shubin, okay, who is at University of Chicago, and this fossil work, he had traveled to the Arctic Circle and had discovered, the earliest skeleton fossil of a fish that made onto on the land, a fish with legs, and and in honor of the native people in that area, the fish was labeled Tiktaalik, okay, and later on, obviously, he saw the advances of molecular biology, and so he is, incorporated molecular biology into his fossil work. And just a few years ago, he had written a book called Your Inner Fish, because mammals, as much as we would like to think, we were not the first ones, because originally life originated in ocean with fish, and the fish migrated to the land gradually, then the amphibians and small mammals, developed, and so the varieties of evolutionary benefits have occurred, because unlike octopus, we talked at length about various eyes, but the fish have excellent vision, so that gave them an advantage, when they migrated to terra firma, okay, and obviously they have strong muscles, they can swim fast, so unless when you contrast them with octopus, they don't, the fish have a type of a skeleton, not as hard and bony as us, but at the same time cartilaginous skeleton. So that gives them the advantage, that the speed and the vision and the bony structure gave them a head start, that they were able to swim fast, and one other thing that we didn't talk about, which I'll have about, is group behavior, as cooperation with other of the same species and other species had a lot more benefit, because obviously the solitary octopus is generally solitary. I mean, we talked about how the female octopus would eat the male for lunch. So that is exactly not the way to increase your population and utilize resources. So this is, one of the things that fish can work in colonies, and so cooperation, and that occurred even in hunter-gatherers. So this is what we talked about. So now this will we're on time. We should take a 5-minute break. We're almost approaching 2 o'clock, and I will pause the recording. And if I can find it, okay, okay, more. Oops. Hopefully, all three of you are at your desk.
Brett, can I ask you a question?
Please go ahead. Yeah, try it. Try to
Who
answer.
decided that the mirror on the wall was the best or only test to recognize selfhood? I mean, there are other ways to do it.
Oh, I'm sure there are others, but this was just one of the, it's relatively easy to perform, perhaps. That's, the things, the type things. So, but, and obviously one can do that with a brainwave and what part of, but the other research is a lot more complicated, basically, to perform, for,
I've seen research in which single cell bacteria
uh-huh, right.
see other bacteria and they know which of the bacteria are like them and which of the bacteria are enemies.
Mhm. Oh,
That's
yeah, there are
like a
varieties of
sense of
chemicals.
self.
Yeah, which are chemicals are secreted, and that's was in fact, I think when we talked about how remember, if you recall the very first slide, we talked about quorum sensing,
Yeah.
how they like they can search for food and they can track their passage. So they
So why wouldn't that be sentience?
yeah, it is. I mean, that it is extended. So this was the one that research, the earlier research, was classical with Descartes. I think we always thought we were the top, nobody else had.
Right,
Then we
right.
kind of extended thing to, but the more and more, there is before you joined, I think we talked about that. I think I sent out a lecture that some of you may have seen, or this is, I just read a book called Metazoa. Okay, this is by an Australian history of science professor and a philosopher, so he has a double interest, so to speak. His name is Peter, and this was so fascinating that goes around to talk about the same thing as to how sentience can go, how the birth of mind might have evolved, with the early sensations, and then even in fruit flies have sensation of pain. So we think ourselves, because fruit flies, you can just see how the number of neurons are relatively small, but they have behavior where they would avoid, like something called nociception, that once they are in pain, once they've had a bad experience, they'll be kind of down or they'll be sort of up. So again, so there is like a sentience that is there even in the lowly fruit fly. So your question is very legitimate, and he extends his whole logic to, and I think some of it is coming up now about how the classical brain waves that we talked about, and there are other types of so-called electrical fields that way the one cell communicates with each other. So there is a lot more to sentience than, so you are, just ahead of my this thing, but this is exactly what his point is, that sentience has very early beginning of some type of awareness of self versus non-self. So when a cell is inside a membrane, that is the self, while when it communicates with the other cell, that is the non-self. Okay, so the boundaries, it's like the boundary zone that is laid out, but that for the people who are strong DNA believers, they have a hard time accepting that idea, and that is why there have been a slew of books that have been written out by how the cell is the basic unit of life, and in terms of collaborating with each other, with other cells, so that is, so you are absolutely, your point is well taken, and you're thinking for similarly as to how the thinking has changed as to how the individual cell has sort of thing that, and that is why and the brain evolution has, because, and I have some more interesting slide that in fact I just read a paper this morning, it was, that is one of the advantages of artificial intelligence, that when you're looking into some areas, it pushes those contents to you. So it has made my work a lot easier than I thought about. Okay. And courses at WashU on, okay. What is this link on, Frank, about? I mean, I know you had this link about,
It's just a link to a comment about Gallup, who in 1970 was the first to publish that mirror test.
yeah. Okay, yeah, because in the early days, we did not have that much molecular, know-how for comparing the genomes and getting down to the cell-to-cell network type of thing. So we're kind of, getting down to the limits of reductionism, so to speak, in terms of philosophy. And at the same time, we're learning that things are a lot more interconnected than we thought. It's just like the whole basis of what is known as complexity theory, still like, and which is, used in varieties of discipline, including in biology, and and there was, and I don't know if I mentioned in the first class or not, but back in 1990, the guy, I talked about Stephen Wolfram. He's not as well as Stephen Hawking's because after, he's one of these brilliant English mathematicians who moved to United States and decided to become rich and created the software called MATLAB, which is widely used in computer science and in advanced mathematics. A lot of the grad students in math would use it. But, he had created a program called Cellular Automata. And he was a self-published book by himself in 1999, which was like a huge coffee table type book, where based on certain rules, how, complexity can evolve from very simple areas. And so that was, and that was in the very first class, if you remember, even von Neumann, had proposed it. So, and so a lot of people have thought about origin of life, and I think I did a brief class during COVID on origin of life. So at that time, and there was another Englishman called Conway's Game of Life, that has been around since early 60s, about how complex life can evolve from a very simple organism, which can communicate with each other and follow the rules. And so there is some type of awareness that is there to cooperate with others. Okay. And so that is, so we'll talk a little bit more as I go along. So I've found some, okay. And so this is, these are some of the basic principles, we're called action manipulation when we migrated from seed, and again, we acquired speed and warmer temperature, so increase the metabolic speed. And then as fish, when we evolved from fish, that was the first time, as opposed to octopus and mollusk, we have a centralized nervous system, okay? And the brain, developed, as a master organ, so was able to control the rest of the organ systems very nicely. And then again, the two, even in bird, there were two different evolutionary trees that went around with birds and, mammals type of thing from fish, and the left and right brain. And remember, we talked about how, the birds and other mollusks would favor one eye. So the same way that Dr. Godfrey Smith's point was how even birds, one side they would use for food, another side for keeping an eye on other things. So left and right brain. So a lot of interesting work has been done on split brain and as to how our thinking goes, because obviously as human beings, we have, preferences for speech is on left side. And I'll talk a little bit about the split brain research that, but I don't want to get ahead of myself, but these are, and so when the first people started detecting EEGs and brain waves, because the earlier research was on cardiac tissue, okay, and then later on, when the electricity became more sophisticated, brain waves. Now, when people who are recording brain waves, they recorded the classical synapses and the potential But at the same time, people detected some other waves which were low frequency, and they were considered like electrical fields. Okay, and some of the research that was done in the 40s, and now and was questioned at that time, said this was just noise from the system, from the recording system, but it is coming into saying that that may have more to it, the electrical fields, and that may have play a role in how the fish in the colonies, when they're swimming with each other, may be able to communicate with their whole school of fish. Okay, and so and so this may have a more to it than we realize as to sense of self and what the philosophers like to call sense of agency. Okay, have a lot more, uh, evolutionary roots are a lot longer. Okay, okay, and okay. So the varieties of ideas have been proposed called agency and subjectivity, and and then obviously the people who have done a lot of consciousness research, that that has always been a biggest field in neuroscience, and a lot of time people could say that it's an emergent phenomenon that has taken place rather than, so it is something that like has evolved rather than you cannot find a seat of consciousness. Okay, and this is what we were talking about, the origin of things, as to how evolution went from the sponges which don't have hardly any nervous system to crabs that developed at least the early start of uh, uh, nervous system, getting back to octopus that developed a different type of nervous system, one in its brain, and the other one that each arm is independently capable of, has a distributed neuron. So like internet, it has a distributed network, so to speak. So, and the arm can actually taste food and smell food, and obviously is involved in reproduction as well. So, and then we talked about how the sharks can work and hunt in packs, basically. So that's is how they're able to communicate with other members of their species, okay, to form coordinate action. So that is how the awareness and sentience phenomenon may have evolved over gradually, along with. And then again, so obviously this was the other tree that came on later on with the last common ancestors, when that took place with the fish, where one side, the earliest that was discovered somewhere in South Africa, coelacanth, that goes back to millions of years, later on to amphibians, marsupials, and so on and so forth, and mammals. And this has obviously this other role, which was what simultaneously, along with the nervous system, eggs and nutrition became a big value. Just recently, a few weeks ago, I read a whole book on the evolution of eggs, as to how just instead of releasing thousands of eggs freely in water, they developed, the system called, evolution, as to how a nutrition was provided with in the ampulla, and the eggs became shelled to protect it, and were able to get oxygen and were well preserved, leading down to a rise that you and I have. We are placental mammals, and where the longer pregnancy and the longer development of brain took place in fetus, and in other mammals such as elephants and whales. So the placenta was the big thing as to how the fetus was able to get nutrition and have a longer time for not only physical but brain development with getting valuable nutrition. And that is another reason why, when we talked about embryology, it is the evolutionary trade-off, because the large baby size, is restricted with the advantage of walking on two legs. The pelvis is only so big, so that's one of the reasons why the most of the a human development for first 2 or 3 years, that human child is totally helpless, because otherwise, it would be, physically impossible to have that brain size develop, inside the uterus, because the pelvis would not accommodate it, and the mother's nutrition would suffer. So that's, so like we talk about the evolutionary conflict or trade-off that takes place with brain development. So we can, and again, I was thinking about as to how we are expanding our senses, by use of our electronic devices, and as to how we are gathering information by cooperating with other people, just like, I mean, like when from the early days, like obviously the great Darwin wasn't aware of what Mendel was doing a few thousand miles away from him. While sitting here, I can gather information from the latest research that is pushed by non-human agents to my desktop. So anyway, this is the varieties of collective intelligence have occurred. So we are by all means no monopoly. The classic example that is given is that of termite mounds. They can get to huge extent, and the same way collective transport of ants, the leaf eater ants, and the network that is done by beavers and honeybees, well, which we already talked about. Okay, and they and the research that is done have, even goes to the extent of proposing that bees have a type of a symbolic language. They can, do a minimal type of counting or paying attention, and can learn by observation. So, and again, they have this sense of pain or avoiding, they're developed. So there is some individual variation from and creatures that are that small. So again, so our monopoly is not just on human consciousness. So the Descartes idea, we can put that to rest very easily, that we're not and that just makes sense, because evolution has been around for, millions of years, and we are kind of Johnny come lately. So, and this is the paper that I was talking about that I just came across within the last few days. About this was research from, I think, one of the, I'm trying to think if it was a California campus or not, as to how the brain, they did something called calcium tagged imaging of brain. Okay, the work was, the organism of research was zebrafish, which is like the workhorse of modern day biology, because this is a transparent body, and all the neurons and other genetic code has been well mapped out. And the thesis of the neural coding, okay, as to efficiency versus resiliency, okay, as to how the brain function occurs over millions of years, okay, and how the brain works is that, their basic conclusion of their abstract could be that brain cells devote no more than half, okay, and 40% of cells for individual tasks, okay, while the other goes towards what is called scalable teamwork. When they work, the neurons work in collaboration with others, type of thing, to get the idea. And this is very cutely explained in plain words that you and I can easily understand. They were quoting the famous basketball player Michael Jordan, that talent can win games, but to win championship you need teamwork. Okay, which I thought made sense. That a prima donna player can, shine and get to one game, but otherwise he has to work in collaboration. So the brain works in collaboration, and they did some very sophisticated brain network imaging, and they have a video on that paper, but I think sometimes, that copyright laws and other stuff may jinx us. So, and this was their research starting back from the lowly fruit flies to the initial model organism for brain research, C. elegans, okay, to zebrafish and mice. Yes,
Can I
please
ask you, the half or 40% to individual tasks and the rest toward teamwork, but what kind of tasks specifically would the teamwork might that be? Did they get
Yeah,
into that?
no, I think it's like processing information, as to like, like guessing, because if you look at vision, okay, like, I mean, I had a lot of the slides in my work on when I did the human senses as to how the brain recognizes the pattern. And after a while, like if you look at the same thing, the brain gets kind of bored, and moves on to other things. So we are looking for changing and constantly making guesswork type of thing as to what is going on. So it interprets the information that is coming in. We are bombarded with various information that comes from the senses, So, I mean, just to give an example, so like if you are, like walking in the dark, the slightest noise may spook you at thinking, your survival instinct may kick in type of thing. So you are trying to interpret the information and also at the same time, you're trying to form the consolidating memories, solidifying as to this memory may need to be rehashed, so to speak. So there is a lot of, below the level of our awareness work that goes on.
When you say below the level of our awareness, what I immediately thought about is, these guys are talking about 40% to 50% in one category and in 40, the others in the other category. But we always talk about in psychology, the division between the conscious and the subconscious mind. It would be interesting, yet nothing that I've ever read tries to talk about percentages as how much of our mental processing, is done by the conscious mind and the subconscious. That would be a really interesting subject,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that is where the sleep comes into the thing, because, like when we, because I had, I've done a lot of work reading on the sleep science of sleep. And, without sleep, it's a huge this thing as to how the brain just rewires itself or cleans out the garbage or relives the scenarios. And I mean, I have one slide that is coming up as to how even in rats, okay, you wouldn't think rats would be doing planning, but there are something called place cells. That place cells received a Nobel Prize to a husband and wife Dutch team, I'm sorry, not Dutch, but a Norwegian team, a while back, type of thing in the 90s, okay. And the place cells are being mapped in rats, and the rats are actually trying to plan. So that's a slide that is coming up, I think. When I read that, I almost fell out of chair. I said, okay, yeah, you wouldn't think, that Mickey Mouse is planning as to how much to raise the rates, but there you have it, so, and this was not just rehashing what it had seen, where it got a shock or where it got food, but planning as to what is the plan, the most effective route, okay. It's almost like, if you know about in mathematics, there is this famous problem as to what is the most efficient way to travel across the bridges of Königsberg. There are like 7 bridges on the river, and it's the most efficient way of, so you don't have to backtrack type of thing. So that is a classical mathematical problem that if you read pure mathematical research that has been around for several hundred years, so to speak. So the same way rat is planning. So yeah, and yes, and to talk about, I absolutely was delighted to read this book about, I thought, okay, well, I mean, he's a philosopher, but at the same time, he's a more science philosophy type of person. He does not get into the realm of qualia and other stuff, the so-called hard problem that David Chalmers and other people have talked about. Oh yeah, scientists should just stay away and leave it all to the philosophers, but he's not of that school. And he just said this is a solvable and studyable problem if you pay enough attention. So, but that, he talks about the hermit crab. Okay, now we're talking about the arthropods, okay? And these are some of the experiments that one of the Australian scientists did, okay, about hermit crab, as to how they did the research on, the crabs actually showed the intelligence of, picking an empty shell, preferring a larger shell, and where they released, they gave them electrical shock, so they avoided that particular shell. But at the same time, if it was a bigger shell, they said, okay, they put up with a low-level shock. I like this house. I'm not going to move. Okay. So there was clear, awareness of, hey, this is, I can put up with that or not put up with this, So these are some of the papers done by a researcher named Elwood, but I don't want to get too much into his paper, but this was, Dr. Peter Smith talks at length about this thing. So they may have a type of awareness and sort of, again, their nervous system is pretty rudimentary, but there you have it, that they're making clear-cut choices and decisions as to what to do. Okay, so it was just mind-blowing type of thing, as to, and these were some of the conclusions, I just put them in a slide basically. So involves extensive information gathering. Okay, it's just like moving to a new house, Okay, let's make a decision. Is it worthwhile? Okay, and how is it worth fighting over or not fighting over? Okay, and clean the house. I mean, it's just, it's whether to believe it or not believe it, but I think this were the conclusion that Dr. Elwood and his team obviously, was true. So this was a very well-organized research type of thing, And obviously that the paper had a lot more details, but I just put some of the conclusions that their team had drawn. Okay. And again, we talked about, the bats, as to, that again, I just thought I had not maybe explained as to how many challenges a bat has for echolocation. So obviously, the brain processing is just phenomenal as to us, faster than the Intel processing chip. In terms of milliseconds, we are talking about making a decision in 3 dimensions. Okay, and working not just in, and utilizing the energy that you get from insects. So you can see how efficient their energy metabolism processing is. Okay, because you look at this computer Google farms, they use as much electricity as a small city, but compared to that, the efficiency that is there in biological system is mind-blowing. Okay, and we talked about octopus, which is, again, we can do a whole class, and I'm sure somebody has done it. When you can just read the book about the soul of octopus, or Simon, and there, and near the coral reef in Australia, there is an area where lots of octopus usually are solitary and hide out, underwater somewhere. But there is area that is preferred by them. It has happened that there are lots of shells that were available, and finally, first a few came in, then other few came in. So now there are hundreds of them. So they have almost named that area called Octopolis. Okay, and Atlantis. So there are 2 areas in the coral reef region of coast of Australia that have this.
I wonder.
Yeah,
I'm just curious whether, I think in terms of human beings and other higher creatures, that intelligence rises along with vulnerability. In other words, we don't have the tools, the speed, the weapons. And I'm wondering whether that would also be true of sea creatures like the octopus. In other words, it seems like the fish would be more mobile. So the octopus might not be as mobile as a barracuda or a shark. And so it would have to develop intelligence. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. We are, traits, in fact, I think, on my shelf, there is a book by a Dutch neuroscientist called We Are Our Brains. If it wasn't for our brains, we would have been eaten a long time ago. I mean, we can't run that very fast. We can't do, and one other point that I did not mention, the big advantage was, along with intelligence, was bipedalism and group behavior, because we learned to work in groups, and that was the big advantage, when you talk about from Lucy, who was living in the apes, and when the humans, when the ancestor descended, they learned tool making with intelligence and working in group and hunting, and losing the ability to sweat. That's why you can, so no, you're absolutely correct. And the one other point I had not thought about, which Dr. Peter Smith makes, is that when fish migrated, the big advantage that occurred was the development of gills into jaw. Okay. And one of his grad students had given an analogy that jaw is like the thumb of the face. Okay, and think about it that, with jaw, you can open the mouth and take a bite or chew. So you have a lot more things instead of sucking with tongue, like the poor anteater was doing, no way you're going to get enough calories, But with the jaw, your hunting abilities increased, and with the fast swimming. So and I thought that was rather clever to put jaw, because fish does not have arms, But the trade-off was the brain as well as the jaw and the eyes. So the eyes were becoming visual because in the depth of the water, having good eyesight wasn't that useful, but still the fish evolved enough of an eye with the lens, so they're able to correct the refraction, because the vision was, and as we have talked about earlier, we are very visual creatures, because we rely on our eyes for in terms of senses, we are okay. So and again, you're absolutely right that brain has a huge trade-off that and as in the very first class we talked about, like as humans we are like infantile chimps. We were able to trade the our strength of the jaw, okay, and the masseter muscle for chewing in order to develop speech, because the larynx descended downwards, and with the and we develop phonation and language. So, but that's another evolutionary one odd. And with the evolution of brain that people have talked about, that one of the physicists named Gary Marcus, who was interested in biology, about a few years ago had written a book called Kluge, K-L-U-G-E. Okay, it's a German word. It's like almost like Rube Goldberg type evolution, as to how. And the point that they were trying to make, when you look at the nerve pathways, I mean, that's almost like somebody who was a little drunk or was smoking something, put it together, And the example that obviously those with medical background would realize, look at the vagus nerve, like how the heck this nerve goes around, wipes around the larynx and throws out branches all over, and you could, just makes the surgeon's life more miserable. But it's just like, it wasn't worthwhile evolving new system. Okay. So nature just, it's just like, in the old town, they just put one on top of the other, basically, and when you looked at the evolution of brain, there was like the paleo brain and midbrain and other stuff that were just one were lost on top of the other. So that's, the word that was flown around was kludge, and there was a book by a guy named Gary Marcus, that thing. So that's, so your thinking is you're coming up with the same idea as yourself. I congratulate you that people have, worked on for a long time, and that is the current thinking. And so the same thing about the octopus intelligence, it says, it's richly endowed with neurons, but several million of them have been given on the 8 arms, and they are sensors and neurons. So arm has, and at the same time, they're kind of difficult to take, because if you dislike a person, they can squirt cold, hot, salty water at you. And one of the researchers that I read about octopus was that the reason why that may have taken a dislike to that person, because she was a smoker. So maybe the sense the chemicals enough that thought, no, this is not the easiest stimulus that I want to deal with. And at the same time, that we talked about the REM sleep and the importance of sleep. So people have imaged, I don't think there was any EEG study, but they've taken observation of cuttlefish, and the colors would change. So, and their eyes would move like a rapid eye movement. So perhaps you can say that, they are dreaming or really rehashing what had happened, a type of thing. So, because their colors dramatically change in not only in cuttlefish, in octopus. So there is some basis to what you're talking about. And at the same time, this is the split brain we talked about, as to how where brain, our speech is on the left side, and as to, and in the early days, unfortunately, Peter Nimi is not here because his late wife was an epileptologist, pediatric epilepsy specialist, and so he has a lot of first-hand knowledge with, and he could have commented as to there was for a while for intractable epilepsy, a split brain surgery was done. Means there is an area that connects our left and right brain. Just to go over basic anatomy, is called corpus callosum, and the surgeon would actually split the two halves, and that cured the intractable epilepsy. And there is a neuroscientist now named Dr. Michael Grazienga, who has spent almost 40 years working on split brain patients, And similarly, we talked about how, and this is again, animals were there before we were, as to we talked about how the whales and other dolphins sleep with one side open, so you can just see the brain wave, because otherwise they would drown, okay? And so it reminded me of the Dr. Seuss cartoon, Thing 1 and Thing 2. And then research on the split brain people, how the input comes from one side to the other side, as to how, if they were quizzed, if they had the surgery and that was secreted, that was placed, as you know very well, the information from brain crosses over from the eye, it's at a place called optic chiasma, okay? And if the writing was flashed on one side, they could not come up with the word, okay, because of the split brain, or drawing and other stuff. So they could not come up with, you can just see how. So these were some of the experiments were done on patients who unfortunately had to have a split brain surgery, okay. Okay, oh, yeah. All right, so this was some of the work that was done, okay, on split brain. So it's a very varieties of research that is done, yes, that the two brains, may communicate and do a lot of sort of conjoint processing. Okay, and this was the example. So, I just thought this was a cute slide, how they can change colors basically. Okay. And these are some of the more other more detailed experiments on octopus, arm and taste and moving from oversight from the brain as to how, and the arm can actually, go and basically work, and it is also used in reproduction. So, okay. And and they may have almost as many as 10,000 neurons to handle touch and taste. Okay, arm that has been surgically removed can perform basic functions as reaching and grasping. It almost sounds, spooky or out of this world. Okay, and this was, now we talked about intelligence. This was a fun video that I should share.
We should all know parrots can articulate human words. We may not be so sure whether they know what they are saying or are simply imitating sounds. The story of Alex the parrot and how a 30-year psychological experiment amazed everyone who heard it helps to provide an answer. Stay with Animal Wise to know more. The origins of Alex and Irene. Alex was an African grey parrot born in 1976. When he was just over a year old, he came to be in the hands of American ethologist and psychologist Irene Pepperberg. Dr. Pepperberg named him Alex as an acronym for Avian Learning Experiment, as she was conducting a study at Indiana University, USA. Dr. Pepperberg's study. Irene wanted to teach Alex to demonstrate the intelligence of birds. Up until this point, science had claimed only primates had the ability to develop an understanding of language. It was believed that birds such as macaws, cockatoos, and other parrots could only imitate sounds without being aware of their meaning. To begin Alex's learning, Dr. Pepperberg decided to apply a teaching method based on 3 rules: the student, the trainer, and a model. In this case, Alex was the student, and he had to watch interactions between the trainer and the model displaying desired student behavior. The idea was for the trainer to say a word, which the model would imitate, and then receive a prize for doing so correctly. Alex would not only notice the model getting rewarded for imitating the word, but he would become jealous of the interactions and want to be involved. Alex began to respond like the model so that he could receive the reward, the result Irene hoped for. Alex's intelligence. After much learning, Alex was able to identify objects, numbers, colors, and shapes. He could also differentiate between sizes and see other differences between objects. He came to use his own vocabulary, which consisted of around 150 words, eventually identifying letters and phonemes. He said sorry when he was wrong, and I want to go back when he was tired and wished to return to his cage. But this was not the only aspect which surprised the world. This incredible bird was able to ask a question. Looking at himself in the mirror, Alex seemed to ask what color his own feathers were, something so exceptional no other animal had previously done so. According to Dr. Pepperberg, Alex had the same intellectual capacity as a 5-year-old child. She was able to demonstrate that parrots not only imitate, but are capable of reasoning at a basic level and creating words. The parrot acquired so much knowledge, he could be described as having his own personality. According to Dr. Pepperberg's students, Alex often used to tell them, I want corn, or I want to climb on your shoulder. There were even days when he hung his head and said, I want to be tickled, as if he were a child. Alex is passing. Although African greys typically live an average of 50 years, Alex passed at only 31 years old. It happened on September 6, 2007. It is believed his death was due to the disease arteriosclerosis from which he suffered. It likely caused a stroke or heart failure. Pepperberg explained that on his final day, he said goodbye in his usual way. When Pepperberg said goodnight, he replied, You be good, I love you, see you tomorrow. Dr. Pepperberg wrote a book as a tribute to Alice in which she collected her 3 decades of learning. In it, she wrote the following. His own conduct at the time of learning revealed to us how much remains to be discovered in the field of animal intelligence. If you want to continue learning about
Okay, so this was, and have many more nerve cells in the small brain than previously believed. They have a specialized brain structure similar to prefrontal cortex in mammals, crucial to abstract and planning and feedback from dopamine. So they have something in neuroscience which is called working memory. Okay, and similarly, Caledonian crows are well known for tool making, problem solving, large brain size, mirror processing, and so on and so forth. So they have, and so again, they have a long childhood. Okay. On the other hand, the spectrums with low ability are ostriches, turkeys, emus, all right. And okay, so even amongst birds, there's a wide variation in their ability. Okay, and this is some of the neuroscience areas to how these areas are, large number of neurons have been mapped. So so this is more detailed paper about the neural features for complex cognition. In the top row, defines say hard to replace features such as large number of associated neurons in prefrontal cortex. Okay. And there are varieties of brain regions which are more of interest to anatomists rather than you and I. Okay, and the varieties of work that are done for intelligence, the books that we talked about, Soul of Octopus by Montgomery, The Other Minds, that is by the researcher whose book I'm reading right now called Metazoa. Okay, and again, it's like obviously the tool, fishing for worms is well known, and it's almost overrated, but algae fishing chimps, that I thought that was a cute picture as to see how a really deliberate behavior was undertaken. And at the same time, there is some type of a grief moment that takes place. I mean, understanding of death can, albino. Now, this was an albino chimp, which is one of the rare occurrences that takes place. And obviously, as somebody who looks different, the us versus them, okay, he was killed by the more dominant males, but then afterwards they were all, definitely exhibiting grief, and carried the dead body for a long time, type of thing. And the same way, the other example that is well known in news was, an orca who carried her dead baby for 17 days. Okay, the gorilla who attempted to suckle, dead mother's breast despite already being weaned. Okay, so these are the varieties of example as to how a death in feeling sorry is not just as a human construct. Okay, this is a video that is, I think I will move it later on, and then just a few slides on symbiotic relationship. That I just thought I was not going to have enough time, but that's why I added. Whales and shark. Now this is whale shark, which is a huge 40-foot a creature. But you can see inside the mouth, there are these, worker fish that have a symbiosis. They clean out the parasites that are in the whale's mouth. And obviously, and they take a little bite out of the whale. So they're benefiting us at the same time. So it's a symbiotic relationship that has taken place, living together. Okay. And so this is the remora fish. Okay. And 4 different types of symbiosis: mutualism, commensal, and parasitism. So these are not all for good. Okay. And these are decorator crabs, So the crabs would decorate themselves with sponges, okay? And that obviously slows down the movement as a camouflage from predators. The sponge continues to live on the shell and exposed to feeding opportunities, okay? So they get a free ride, so to speak. So they both benefit. That's the mutualism example, okay? Butterflies and flowers we already talked about, okay? Commensalism, only one organism benefits from the other: barnacles and whales. Barnacles are unable to get around it as the whales swim around. No, they attach themselves. Okay, whales, just say okay, they don't care, but they're just going for a free ride. Unfortunately, and I'm sure it slows them down. Commensals, imperial ship uses that sea cucumber for its purpose, hangs on tights. Okay, and let's go. And after the shrimp is finished, climbs back on the sea cucumber, travels around. And so, so again, no benefit to the or other creature, or the shrimp gets a free ride. Okay, parasitism. Okay, this is very well known, and if all of us know each victim, the poor dog who has got ticks. Okay, and the tapeworms. These are the ugly little creatures. They could become some serious damage. Okay, and very risky research, but biotropic, that rely on the host surviving. It's not in the interest of the mosquito to kill you, because otherwise, there would be no host basically. Okay, and head lice, good example of it. Okay, necrotropic. This is the ghoulish tail that we ended our talk with the other time. Okay, lays eggs inside the other one. And inside the worm, okay, and literally, eats them alive. So the predators, the biggest one, obviously, hail to the mosquito. And we started our talk about showing how many ways a mosquito has, to make sense and find you, not just the carbon dioxide, touch, feel, okay, temperature changes. So it has all sorts of mechanisms. So no matter what you do, it will be out to get you. The trick is not to scratch, but try doing that. Okay, and this is, so we are finished in a few minutes in time. Okay, and this was just, I don't think it will play easily because it was an orangutan who is actually asking for treat, okay, and tells the human, just get around the curve on a zoo. Okay, so I think we're finished at this point. Thank you folks for hanging around. I will stop the recording and see you sometime, hopefully in future. Okay, let me stop the recording then. Okay, thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it was fun.